Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would like to continue on and in fact conclude our discussions with respect to a very wonderful recent release made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. This release is designated by Criterion at spy number 1082, and it is this: The Signifyin Works of Marlon Riggs. This is a 2-disc Blu-ray set, and it is a gathering or collection of works from this extraordinary filmmaker and artist, Marlon Riggs. So this is a very fantastic release from Criterion, and it has been my great honor to have been able to speak about each of the works that is contained within this set in a series of past videos. And so that series now brings us to today, which is the final discussion video in such series, wherein I'd like to focus now on the set itself, as well as the supplements that are included in this particular set, as well as some concluding remarks about this set called The Signifyin Works of Marlon Riggs. So, as I mentioned, yes, the number of works, or the works by Marlon Riggs, are featured and spread out over 2 Blu-ray discs, which is what we have here. And also associated with each of those Blu-ray discs, we have the supplements or the supplemental materials that are included therein. So first, what do we have as far as supplements that are included on each of the discs? So on disc 1, we have a number of supplements. First, we have I should point out that the films that are featured are Ethnic Notions, Tongues Untied, and Affirmations and Anthem. And with respect to those works, we have the POV introduction by Marlon Riggs himself with respect to the work Tongues Untied. So this is approximately 1 minute and 25 seconds or so. And so here we have Marlon Riggs giving some brief introductory comments about the work Tongues Untied, about certain decisions he made about actually having himself feature as a significant part of the work Tongues Untied, etc. So it serves as a wonderful reminder of the direct and pointed and very sharp and brilliant nature of Marlon Riggs' intellect, and also his artistic honesty and devotion to the craft as expressed in this great work Tongues Untied. So please note that such introduction or POV introduction is only for Tongues Untied with respect to this first disc. So that's one of the supplements. And then continuing on with the first disc, we have an actual supplement section that is part of the sub-menu. And in the supplement section, we have first an introduction, which is from 2020, and this is approximately 23 minutes, and it appears to be an online discussion among Vivian Kleiman and Shai Keith and Ashley Clark, and it is called Race, Sex, and Cinema, The World of Marlon Riggs. And here we have comments with Ashley Clark giving his viewpoints, his interpretations on the works of Marlon Riggs, the significance of the filmography and life and career of Marlon Riggs, as well as moderating this wonderful discussion, first with Vivian Kleiman, who has a very direct connection in terms of working with Marlon Riggs, knowing Marlon Riggs, and being part of the creative crew in terms of the body of work from Marlon Riggs. So Vivian Kleiman gives some really excellent and insightful background details and information, for instance, about the early part of Marlon Riggs's film and artistic life, including comments about the work Long Train Running, the story of the Oakland Blues, and how this is a type of film form, experimental form of blues, or it's focusing on the experimental form of blues, etc. And also how Marlon Riggs himself is a filmmaker, artist. Also, he is an educator, he is a teacher, he is a professor. And also there are some great discussions about the flow of the career of Marlon Riggs, beginning with from this point, beginning with ethnic notions, and talking about how this is in many ways a type of tapestry, or a collection or gathering of many forms of artistic mode and style of Marlon Riggs. He devotes a lot of time to different forms of media, for example, in the discussion of ethnic notions, and then continuing on to a brief discussion or introduction to the work Tongues Untied, and the various choices that led to his decision to actually have himself be part of the film itself. Also mentioning the poetry and contributions of Essex Hemphill, and also the mentioning about how this was around this time, this was where Marlon Riggs discovered that he was ill with HIV. And so here we also have a very significant and quite a serious part of Marlon Riggs's life too that is emerging, and also talking about the type of, say, pressures that Marlon Riggs was facing externally in terms of the political discourse that was emerging and erupting, perhaps as a result of the convergence of a number of things. For instance, the idea of, or the fact of Tongues Untied having been broadcast on public broadcast television in the United States on the one hand, and how this coincided with the election season in the United States, and particularly the attention that such news was the attention that it drew from certain aspects of certain political parties in the United States. And so this is very much part of the discussion leading into other works like Anthem and Non Je ne regrette rien and Black Is, Black Ain't, and for affirmations, etc. And then also we have an emphasis in this conversation about how Marlon Riggs's his sort of raison d'etre, if you will, or his mode of living, or his purpose, seems to be devoted around the concept, this fundamentally important concept of love and family. And for him, Marlon Riggs, his mother and grandmother in particular, were very important in his life. And there's a great comment that the three of them, well, I should say too that Shai Keith also provides inspirational, or he provides comments about how Marlon Riggs served as a wonderful inspiration to him and to his art, and to how Marlon Riggs provided this great example of how to use the medium of visual arts, television, film, etc., to really have this means by which honest assessments and real intimate one-on-one types of expressions of self can really be captured, and how cinema can really protect that and uphold it, and also promote it as well in this same vein and style that is very much part of the example of Marlon Riggs' own filmography. Again, one of the key points of Marlon Riggs' films is the idea of the importance placed upon self-expression. And self-expression talking about many aspects of one's inner, say, character or inner being, whether that be ideas about one's own self and sense of self vis-a-vis the outside world, maybe in the sense of how one feels about one's sexuality, or maybe the idea of identity and background and race and the notion of how this too, the expressions of these, as also in the context of the external realities of certain aspects of living in the United States during the 1980s and into the 1990s, how this is also very much part of the act of self-expression. And here Shai Keith, and Ashley Clark and Vivian Kleiman, I think, really capture this in their conversation well about how Marlon Riggs was such a great, in many ways, a type of pioneer in terms of the use of this mode of storytelling to get at something very honest and very truthful, and also very much upholding and promoting the idea of the importance of self-expression. This is, and there's a real powerful comment that was made in this conversation, because also one of the aspects of Marlon Riggs' cinema is the idea of how he handled and discussed and treated aspects of race and racial identity. And there's a comment here where Marlon Riggs understood how blackness exceeded representation. And I think this is such a powerful statement, because I think it goes at the very heart of another powerful aspect of his cinema, namely the idea about how this link between identity and individuality and racial identity and individuality is so fundamentally key to Marlon Riggs, and how this expression, this individual expression, that itself is the key. And I think that is what's being meant when it says blackness exceeds representation in the eyes of Marlon Riggs. And so, and it is, I think, a really nice representation of how, or a reflection of how, for instance, that thesis or that argument or that fundamental statement of Marlon Riggs is expressed in a film like, say, Black is Black Ain't. So this is a really bold and wonderful discussion among the three participants here. Again, approximately 23 minutes. So please check it out if you can. Once again, it's called Race, Sex, and Cinema, The World of Marlon Riggs. But that's not all, because also continuing in the supplement section of the first disc is the actual work, the thesis work by Marlon Riggs and Peter Webster from 1981, which is Long Train Running, The Story of the Oakland Blues. Approximately 28 minutes. So this was referred to in the earlier discussion in the supplements. Now this is great too, because we have again the thesis work, and so from the early 80s, and the focusing in on Oakland and the blues, and so musical traditions, past and present, and also musicians on camera, speaking, being interviewed, talking about the past works, talking about developments of various forms of blues and performance, and also specific musicians that were pioneers and incredibly important in this field and area, and also some very interesting compares and contrasts, this type of focusing in on the environment and the situations of the current, and also linking this idea of place and culture. And also in this, embedded in this conversation, there are very interesting examples or references to representations of class and race. So here we have a really fascinating early example of the Marlon Riggs approach, again together with Peter Webster. But this is, I think, a very important work, and I'm glad it's included here because it can and perhaps should be included and counted as being part of the Marlon Riggs filmography. So wonderful job having this included. Long Train Running, The Story of the Oakland Blues. Approximately 28 minutes. So once again, please check this out if you can upon watching all of the works here. Also, if you can, watch this work. But that's not all, because then the first disc continues with its supplements, with a supplement which is called In the Life, Marlon Riggs, described as being from May 1992, approximately 11 minutes. And this is talking about, this is sort of an interview discussions with Marlon Riggs. And he's talking about the context of how he views himself. And he views himself in terms of his art as a type of independent documentary producer. And also one of his objectives or purposes or goals in terms of his art is how he describes it as being trying to or endeavoring to destroy misconceptions of what it means to be gay or black. And so this is, I think, a very another powerful statement from Marlon Riggs. And again, it's very exemplary of the works of Riggs in the Signifyin works. So take, for instance, Ethnic Notions or Tongues Untied or Black is Black Ain't or Non je ne regrette rien as examples, or even affirmations or anthems, or color adjustment. So and also he expresses the idea of what it is we mean when we say cinema. And so for him, I think this is the key, or this is one of his ways to express his view of his works being an attempt, as I say, to uphold the notion of self-expression and value the importance of self-expression. Again, we recall, for instance, very powerful comments from Tongues Untied about the idea of the loneliness of silence, and perhaps even various dangers of a type of personal silence, and how many of the participants of that work, Tongues Untied, declare affirmatively how they will no longer be silent, and they will be guided by the beat of their own beating and thriving heartbeat. And so this is, I think, a great, not just a great metaphor, but it's a real direct type of statement regarding the utmost beautiful and truly overwhelming and powerful and fundamentally important act of self-expression. And so I think this is captured and embodied and forever celebrated in the form of the cinema of Marlon Riggs. And so I think this is inherent in that statement when you ask, what do we mean when we say cinema? And also the idea of a type of cinema and self-expression in the context or vis-a-vis personal and political empowerment. So this is, I think, a really powerful set of statements. He's also talking too about that the concepts of the concepts or ideas of discussions regarding race and racial identity on the one hand, and also sex and sexuality on the other, and how sometimes for Marlon Riggs, based on his own personal experience as he shared it with us, perhaps those discussions are not always easy to have at the same time. Let me put it that way. And he gives the background details, or some background details regarding the film Color Adjustment as an example of this. So we also get some very direct statements from Marlon Riggs about this particular point in a work like, say, Black is Black Ain't. So all in all, another wonderful inclusion by the Criterion Collection. Whenever there's an opportunity to hear Marlon Riggs speak in these direct and honest and candid ways about his works and the principles that are guiding his works, I think it's a very valuable thing to have indeed. So please check this out as well if you can. But that's not all, because then we have, again on Disc 1, another supplement. This time it's called Remembering Marlon, A Kindred Spirit. This is from 2021, approximately 21 minutes. And this is a collection of, say, interviews or one-on-one discussions edited together, each with Brian Freeman, Reginald T. Jackson, and Bill T. Jones. And each of these gentlemen, each of these individuals participated in or was involved with the work or works of Marlon Riggs in one form or another, either in front of the camera or behind the camera. And so it's wonderful to meet them again in 2021 and to see where they have been since their participation in the various works by Riggs. And they are talking too about how, for instance, their participation in some of the works like, say, Tongues Untied or Black is Black Ain't, or let's take that earlier work, Tongues Untied, as an example, about how this film was so very important for them, because it was a means by which they could express their feelings of being part of this community. that is captured within the work Tongues Untied itself, or that is exemplified in a lot of the scenes in Tongues Untied regarding these group of individuals who describe themselves as black gay men, and they are talking within Tongues Untied about their race and racial identity and their sexuality, and oftentimes a number of the challenges that they have faced in their own lives and how they are dealing with those challenges. And part of that discussion too is the idea of community, between the feeling of community between and among these men. And also now in contemporary times, 2021, they are talking about how a film like Tongues Untied was really important in order to promote this idea of community, which is a very essential part of a lot of the lives of these individuals. So this is it's really fascinating to hear their contemporary comments here. Also, they are mentioning too a lot of the sad points, the tragic points with regard to the AIDS epidemic, and how the AIDS epidemic led to the sad and tragic deaths of a lot of the people that they were very close to, and they had these wonderful friendships with. And so this becomes a point of remembrance of their memories as well. And also at the same time too, again, going back to this idea of self-expression and the importance of self-expression, the idea that a film like Tongues Untied was so important for them in their lives because it allowed them to express themselves and to have fun with that self-expression. The idea of the snap culture comes to mind, the snap scene in Tongues Untied being one of the most famous of that work, and also the use of poetry as well. The Essex Hemphill poetry is an example, but the use of poetry as a means to express what is in one's heart. And also the idea of what black gay life meant. This is the words of one of the participants here. And this is a really important point, again, linked to this notion of community as mentioned before, and also the idea of the individual spirit being preserved via the mode of self-expression as contained within a film like Tongues Untied. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. And also they speak about some details of the background of certain key scenes of the film, etc. And also there's talk too about Marlon Riggs and his own private life, and we get a sense of this too in a later work by Riggs, Black is Black Ain't, but there's some mention too of Marlon's partner, his lifetime partner, and how the race of his partner, who is a white man, how this too played into, or how this was part of the post-release discussion of a work like Tongues Untied, especially I think a lot of the, maybe not a lot, but this discussion reminds us about how some of the criticism that Marlon Riggs received after the release of Tongues Untied had to do with some of these details regarding Marlon Riggs' own private life, and what some might have regarded as being a type of hypocrisy, given the types of messages regarding representations of race that are contained within Tongues Untied on the one hand, and Marlon Riggs' own private life on the other. And I think this conversation now, the Criterion Collection conversation between and among these gentlemen, really does a lot to dispel such criticisms on the one hand, and also really remind us too about how Marlon Riggs was an individual. He was a human being. He had his life. He had his loves. He had his family. He has his close, intimate relationships. And also he is expressing what it is he truly feels in films like Tongues Untied. So this is, again, the wonderful portrait of Marlon Riggs, the human being, the individual and artist. And so these details are being revealed here. Also, Reginald T. Jackson talks about affirmations, because he is featured prominently in the first part of that short work in particular. And he's talking about what the reactions were in terms of what he was speaking about at the time, because it was a very frank discussion about sexual experiences and how he was linking the idea of sexual experience with liberation. And he brings up a really interesting point here too about how there might have been some unease in terms of the people who were reacting to what it was he was saying. He felt, on the contrary, that what he was talking about was very liberating and that it was liberation. Certain acts of sexuality being examples of acts of liberation. But some of the criticism that perhaps he might have received was the idea, or what he identifies as being linked to the notion of, or the idea or the concept that, or the discussion points about how there might be this uneasiness between a discussion of race and racial representations and also discussions of sexuality. And this point that he brings up is again linked to Black is, Black ain't, which is brought up there as well, about how they sometimes they're not coinciding perfectly, because there are oftentimes points of contradiction between proponents from certain parts of the community that are talking about the importance of race and racial representation and unity on the one hand, while at the same time perhaps not necessarily addressing the same type of spirit of expression when it comes to sexuality and homosexuality, etc. So this is, I think, hinted at, not just hinted at, it's, I think, directly referenced in Reginald T. Jackson's comments here. So this is, again, another brilliant aspect of this particular supplement. And also mentioning, of course, the grave significance of a work like Black is, Black ain't, and about how this was also showing Marlon Riggs's final moments of his life, but also, or perhaps in that spirit, we also see Marlon Riggs and these gentlemen remark upon this so poignantly, about how we see Marlon Riggs being very spiritual and being very, he is almost transcending his physical state of pain, because he's obviously in a lot of pain and a lot of physical duress due to his condition. But he seems to be expressing a type of spiritual dignity, and that is a very beautiful remark that these gentlemen are emphasizing when they're talking about this work, and then Marlon Riggs' life overall, and how Marlon Riggs was this great inspiration to them, and how he and his examples inspired them to continue with their own expressions and creativity and careers, indeed. So this is a really wonderful, beautiful conversation between and among these gentlemen here. So once again, this is A Kindred Spirit, approximately 21 minutes. And that's not all, because then the first disc supplements continue with a supplement from 2021 also. This is approximately 16 minutes. It is called Editing with Marlon. This is a one-on-one conversation with Christian Badley. And Christian Badley is very important in terms of the creative world of Marlon Riggs and the Signifyin works. She works as an editor. She also works as a co-producer. She works as a co-director as well on the work Black is, Black ain't, because we understand too that Marlon Riggs worked so hard and so tirelessly to try to start and continue and indeed try to finish Black is, Black ain't in 93 and 94. But unfortunately, very sadly and very tragically, Marlon Riggs passed away in April 1994, before the film Black is, Black ain't could be completed. And so what ended up happening was Christian Badley and others who are very close on the crew of the work Black is, Black ain't really came together in those months following the passing of Marlon Riggs, and they tried to finish the work, and they indeed finished the work in a way that they felt was respectful of the wishes of Marlon Riggs and how he wanted to complete it, also including a number of scenes of direct discussions with Marlon Riggs on his hospital bed, where he is honestly talking about various aspects. And those scenes, I think, emerge in Black is Black Ain't in a truly powerful way. And Christiane Badgley does mention about how she hopes that the final end product, if you will, of Black is Black Ain't is in wholly keeping with the artistic wishes of Marlon Riggs. And I have no doubt that that is indeed the case. So this is a really lovely conversation, and you can tell that she's very much in keeping with what it was that drove the principles that drove Riggs's works in filmography. She speaks about other works as well. She talks, for instance, about Anthem, how it was like a poem made into a film. She speaks about how Marlon Riggs's works are like, what does she say, a radical exercise in honesty. Yes, this is a brilliant way of putting it. This is, again, the idea of the upholding or the fundamental importance placed on self-expression. And that indeed becomes an intimate act. It also potentially becomes a personal act, a radical act, using maybe political terminology perhaps, or a political act overall, whatever the situation or context or the specifics of what is being expressed calls for perhaps. But in any event, these are acts of self-expression and honesty, and this is something that Christiane Badgley mentions so well indeed. And so for these and other reasons, please check out this conversation with her, approximately 16 minutes. And then we have another supplement on disc 1. This time, this is called The Everlasting Influence of Marlon Riggs. And this is also from 2021, approximately 20 minutes. And this is with 3 artists and filmmakers themselves, Jericho Brown and Cheryl Dunier and Rodney Evans. And each of them is talking about how Marlon Riggs influenced them and their art and their own expressions. And for instance, the idea of how Marlon Riggs expressed notions of, say, identity or sexuality, or how some of them express the idea of how this is real, a realness of those expressions, and how this became, I think, a shining light for many artists around the world, such as Cheryl Dunier or Rodney Evans or Jericho Brown, and this idea of the feeling of, first of all, not feeling alone anymore. Marlon Riggs also showing a type of earnest sincerity and great intelligence and wit and charm and creativity in his craft, and how that became, too, a type of shining guide or example for many young aspiring filmmaker artists who then were part of that generation or following generations, and then now they are themselves continuing on in their own unique artistic ways and creative ways, but they are also, in a sense, continuing on in this creative pioneering spirit of Marlon Riggs, and they too, I think, acknowledge that artistic debt owed to Marlon Riggs, and also show their appreciation and gratitude, as well as celebrate the life and legacy of Marlon Riggs in their own way. So, beautiful gathering of comments here in this supplement, The Everlasting Influence of Marlon Riggs, again, approximately 20 minutes. Now, moving on to disc number 2, because as I say, there are 2 Blu-ray discs. So the second disc has the works Color Adjustment, Non, je ne regrette rien, and Black is Black Ain't. So of these works, we should point out that there is the POV introduction from Marlon Riggs only for the work Color Adjustment. So this is from 1992, and the introduction itself is approximately 2 minutes. So it's quite brief, but it's well worth it, again, to hear the direct comments from Marlon Riggs himself. Marlon Riggs on POV, the idea of memories of television that he had, and how he was, he realized about how the sort of the deep potential influence of images shown on TV, and how this is the essential point of a work like color adjustment. So it's great to have this introduction here as well. So that's one of the so-called supplemental features that's included. But then if we go to Disc 2's menu, we get the supplements section. In that menu, the sub-menu, and then in that we have a number of supplements continued. So first we have a what is called Ethnic Notions and Color Adjustment, a 21st Century Conversation, approximately 21 minutes. And this is between Raquel Gates and Herman Gray. And this is wonderful because we have Herman Gray, who appeared as one of the academics and experts in the work color adjustment, and so how he is now looking back on that work, and also in discussion with Raquel Gates about the importance of Marlon Riggs's work and his documentary work, and what it was that he was trying to address quite directly. Mechanisms of supremacy as embodied within television, as an example, and also turning their attention to other works by Riggs, such as Ethnic Notions, how gender politics is part of the discussion there in terms of representations of certain images of masculinity, images of so-called quote-unquote masculinity or quote-unquote femininity, and how those are related perhaps in an adverse or detrimental way towards derogatory racial stereotypes, as discussed in Ethnic Notions, and also discussions of the background of the minstrel show and how this idea of the minstrel show actually carried on in various iterations from the 19th century into the 20th century, and indeed it could be said that it continued on in certain aspects of television representations. That is indeed touched upon quite effectively in color adjustment. So, and they also talk the two of them talk about the distinctions between the two works. It's often regarded, or it's often said that Ethnic Notions and color adjustment seem to be very similar in terms of their approach, their style, the so-called quote-unquote talking heads documentary. But this is a phrase refers to the idea of a documentary relying on, among other things, excerpts of interviews with various participants, academics, scholars, people who were part of the background conversations or production details, etc. And so that's the case for those two works. So in that way, I think they were quite similar. But what the discussion here indicates too, there are also some really key differences. For instance, color adjustment, perhaps due to its focus on 20th century television, had also the opportunity to talk directly to the producers of the various television shows that are being focused on, for instance, Norman Lear, etc., David Wolper, etc. So this is I think, a very important distinction that the two of them make here, because it allows for a type of direct conversation between those who are directly responsible for a lot of the decisions that were made in terms of the various TV shows that are focused on, and indeed what was the reasoning for those decisions being made. And I think there's also a very important distinction being made here too, which is that Marlon Riggs does not appear to try to interview these producers, for instance, in a manner that's confrontational or adversarial, but rather really trying to have an honest discussion as to what were those specific reasons or concerns at the time that led to certain specific casting decisions or stories about the sitcom setup or whatever the case may be, which now in hindsight, and especially in a discussion context like color adjustment, might be said to be somehow or another further types of maybe further types of furtherance of racial stereotypes in 20th century television. So this is, I think, a really important distinction, and I'm so glad that they have made this here, because it's also very indicative of the honest, sincere approach of Marlon Riggs in these and other works. And the idea too, and I really love this phrase from Raquel Gates, the idea of the one of the key points of color adjustment is the idea of television and representations of race as shown in some popular, say, mainstream sitcoms or dramas on television at the time, how this problematizes the positive image as a corrective. And this is a brilliant way of expressing it. In other words, it's addressed in discussion of color adjustment, for instance, the idea of using comedy or the over-reliance on comedy when you have other types of real-world situations presented in a work like, say, Good Times. And the argument that was presented in color adjustment towards the tail end of that discussion related to Good Times, if we recall, is this idea that perhaps it does show a type of normalization of certain, say, financial hardships that these characters are shown to be facing within the context of the story, but how it was also meant to be a type of way to show certain real world or real life external realities of certain parts of the population of the United States. And so, but if the ultimate result is to make it funny or to normalize it, then what it does is it dulls the momentum potentially in trying to show and also inspire the need for change. And so this, I think, is the essence of what Raquel Gates and Herman Gray are speaking about here. And this is also spoken about, too, in the context of the discussion of roots, and it reminds us, too, of what was spoken about in the context of that show and color adjustment. So the idea of racial politics and the dynamics of racial politics, and what are the constituents of harm, and what are the ultimate consequences of these types of images, etc., etc. So they are further augmenting and expressing and solidifying the basic or fundamental statements of color adjustment, and they are talking about it in sort of a modern context as well, and also in hindsight. But those messages, I think, we realize still remain resonant and quite relevant. So bravo for this wonderful and brilliant discussion. Please check it out if you can. Again, approximately 21 minutes on disc 2. That's not all, because on disc 2 we also have approximately 1 hour, or I should say 58 minutes, so just shy of an hour, supplement from 1996 from Karen Everett. This is called I Shall Not Be Removed, The Life of Marlon Riggs. So this is a type of documentary looking at the life and times and films and career of Marlon Riggs from the time he was growing up, when he was a child, and his education, how he was a very intelligent boy it was shown from a young age, and he moved certain places, and then he ended up going to Harvard University, and his horizons were further opened and broadened in terms of his study of history, and African American history being one of the studies, and also he wanted to study film in the context of film and journalism. That led to him going to University of California at Berkeley, studying at the Graduate School of Journalism, and leading to his work, his graduate thesis film that was mentioned earlier, his meeting with his life partner, Jack Vincent, making Ethnic Notions, making Tongues Untied, the falling, of course, very seriously ill, complications from AIDS and kidney failure, and how he was undergoing great physical pain. And it was very emotionally difficult, and he expresses as much. He says at one point, the film shows at one point where he says, "I expected to die at any moment." Let me say that again. I expected to die at any moment. This is overwhelming. This is really overwhelming, and how this aspect of his physical health was perhaps one of the main reasons for him to make the choice to have himself feature in the work Tongues Untied the way it does, and to make his life part of the story of expression and the importance of expression and the importance of being honest, especially with very intimate and perhaps oftentimes details about one's life that are very difficult to express. So this is a very overwhelming and powerful aspect of the telling of the life of Marlon Riggs. There's a great anecdote that Marlon Riggs gives about the Berlin International Film Festival showing of Tongues Untied, and how his mother was in attendance watching the film for the first time, and and he was nervous. He expressed being nervous, and so nervous that he couldn't sit next to her at the screening. That's what he says. But then after the screening was over, he saw her reaction, and he knew that upon watching the film, she understood and that she accepted. And this is so important, according to Marlon Riggs, because according to him, it was a profound moment for me because I had her blessing. Wow, this is really powerful. And then it goes into a number of the controversies too that were part of Marlon Riggs' life and filmography. For example, Tongues Untied. I mentioned it earlier about how the broadcast of Tongues Untied on American television, on American television, PBS, etc., how this set off a type of firestorm of controversy, especially coinciding with the Republican presidential primary season in the early 1990s. And so this led to this debate, this public debate and discussion, using Tongues Untied as a type of subject as to the idea of this type of program being shown on public broadcast television, etc., as a type of attack or critique in the context of political ads, etc. And so Marlon Riggs therefore became, and his work became, in many ways front and center of this type of firestorm of discussion. And in that context, the film Anthem, that comes a little bit later, might be said to be a type of response to this political firestorm discussion and controversy, especially when we consider the concept of anthem being the idea of expression and dance and images of sexuality and a type of humane visual representations and expressions of that, how this is linked to with the images of the American flag, and therefore concepts or notions of patriotism. And this could be seen, I think, in a number of ways. First, it could be seen as a reaction to that political controversy from the early 90s, from Tongues Untied. And or it could also be seen as a type of metaphor for what could be said to be maybe an ironic take on the nature of patriotism, or it could be said to be an affirmative, earnest expression that links the importance of a type of civic pride with the sense of individualism and the individual spirit, and how this is perhaps the very essence of what is being expressed when certain expressions of patriotism are expressed, i.e. anthem. And so I think there are many modes that can be viewed when watching a work like Anthem, but especially taking into context the type of discussions that took place after Tongues Untied was broadcast. So this is another great aspect of this great documentary in this way. And then it goes into a discussion of color adjustment, the emphasis or the reminder about the powerful position of TV as a medium of influence, etc., etc. And then it goes into more discussions of the career of Riggs, Non, je ne regrette rien, the Fear of Disclosure Project, and how there's also this feeling of a type of race against time, because that subject matter, of course, is also these gentlemen are talking directly to the camera and thus to us about their their feelings of themselves, and also how they are confronting and dealing with and handling their situations, and the way in which people react to them in the context of their conditions as being HIV positive. And so this is also reminding us too about Marlon Riggs' own life and his own physical condition at this time, the early 1990s. So this then leads to a sense of urgency, which of course is very much part of the discussion of the work Black Is, Black Ain't. The idea of Marlon Riggs showing us, letting us, maybe sharing with us his own pain, a type of personal crisis, and also, of course, the film very sadly and very tragically, the film also covers his very sad and tragic passing in a certain way, but also it's also an upholding of his memory and legacy, as well as dealing head on with those very, confronting those issues head on in terms of race, identity, sexuality, and the notion of community, unity, communion, etc., etc. So this is a very powerful documentary. Again, approximately 1 hour. Please check it out if you can. It's a wonderful primer. It's a wonderful overview of his life, and it serves yet as another great and lovely reminder of the power of Marlon Riggs, the artist, the human being. So please check it out if you can. And now let me say a few words about the Criterion release itself. So as I said, this is a 2-disc Blu-ray set. It is all encompassed or housed within this Digipack sleeve compartment arrangement, with the outer covering and the interior compartment being like so. And we have this wonderful design work, and let me just show you inside here what it looks like. The 2 discs are housed like so. And then in here would go the booklet. I've taken the booklet out, but the booklet would go in here, and then you can close it and then put it back into the casing. So I really like this design very much. This design work, the focus on images and words, is very much reminding us of the visual style that accompanied a lot of Marlon Riggs' own works, the Signifyin works. So let me just say here, the production credits here list the art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, designer Hassan Rahim. So wonderful design, look and feel and aesthetic. It's such a great expression of the works of Marlon Riggs. I should say too that this image of Marlon Riggs here too is, I understand, taken from an image from the work Tongues Untied. So very emblematic, very strong and direct. That his eyes, just his look. There is so much honesty here. That's a wonderful, great way to present this particular set. So thank you very much to Criterion for this. And then I should mention too, I mentioned the booklet. This is a staple booklet, and it is wonderful. It is wonderful. The design work continues on into the booklet in terms of some of the pictures and the presentation. Again, it's very emblematic of the style of Marlon Riggs himself, so that's wonderful. There are descriptions of each of the works, a brief write-up together with the cast and crew details for each of the works, which is great. And then there is the wonderful essay. This is the very detailed and very comprehensive essay from K. Austin Collins, and I've read it many times. It's called Positive Images. K. Austin Collins' essay, Positive Images, and I love this because it is, as I say, comprehensive. It is a great overview, and also it places sort of the importance of the filmography of Marlon Riggs in context, in a type of historical and literary and cinematic context, but also it emphasizes or reminds us of the individual importance and value of Marlon Riggs, his art and his life itself. So, and as I say, it's a great cataloging and guide through the works. So you get many guides within this set through the works of Marlon Riggs, for instance, the introduction that's on disc 1, or maybe the 1 hour documentary that's on disc 2, and also this essay as well. This is one of the best essays. I think the essays by Criterion, or that are included with the Criterion releases, are wonderful. This is one of the best. So if you have the opportunity, please check out this essay if you can. Wonderful edition as part of this release from Criterion. And so, my dear friends, this is the overview of the great set from Criterion, which is right here at spine number 1082. Let me now place it on the table one more time here. This is the Signifyin works of Marlon Riggs. I should say thank you so much. Thank you so much for those who have joined us in our discussions of these works. This is, let me say too, that I am in no way an expert when it comes to the works of Marlon Riggs, and so from my vantage point, exploring or having the ability to explore his works through a set like the Criterion Collection was and is a true learning experience, and I am very inspired by the example and life and works of Marlon Riggs, and I am overcome with a lot of feelings when I view his works, and I oftentimes feel in a great way, I feel challenged, and I feel like I'm being reminded of so much in terms of the value of art and the value of expression, and the idea of the maybe universal spirit that is being engaged with in all of his works, as well as the individual beauty and grace and treasure that is being also showcased and expressed by all of the individuals that are featured in this work, or in these works. Included, of course, is Marlon Riggs himself. So this set is absolutely brilliant. So if you have the opportunity, my dear friends, I hope you can explore and continue to explore this wonderful release from the Criterion Collection. Again, it's spine number 1082, the Signifyin works of Marlon Riggs. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much for all of your precious time. I very, very much appreciate it. Truly I do. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I very much hope you are well, and until we see each other again, cheers.